Okay. Are we ready, Michael?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have this online event, and thank you to joining us today. Thank you to all our colleagues connected and interested to follow what will happen with US elections next 5th of November on energy and climate policies proposed by Trump and Harris. I am honored, pleased, and proud to have this first activity as Program Director of Energy Transitions and Climate of the Inter-American Dialogue. Thank you to Rebecca Vilchavez and all the dialogue team in the coordination of this event, in special to Michael Kearns for his outstanding support. Presidential elections in United States are always observed with detail in Latin America. The commercial, economical, cultural, social, and geopolitical incidence of US in many of the countries of the region is by nature high, and therefore this is a direct expected impact in the region. It is necessary to talk about those potential impacts on two main issues that are in the focus of the candidate campaigns: energy and climate. I have a formed opinion about the role of United States and Latin American and the Caribbean relation for the future. Possible, this new era positions Latin America in a different situation with respect to the regional relations in the past. This changed situation is due to our region, all the Americas, have a key position in future development in terms of nearshoring and power shoring, in the role of critical minerals, as well as in issues such as energy transitions and horizons for the oil and gas production. It is clear that the influence of the United States is different in countries, and that influence depends on multiple factors. All of those factors we have to analyze today. Also, depending on the US elections, we will have different positions regarding the development of regional and international relations and alliances. Some examples are the positioning on climate change and the influence that China and other extra-regional blocs could have in the near future. In this sense, to have a deep dive in all of these topics, I am accompanied by a great friend, and it is a privilege for me to have Paul Simon to contribute his exceptional, sharp, and expert vision this morning. Paul, from his position as a diplomat in the International Energy Agency and an insider US diplomat in our region, he will provide us with analysis and opinions during this hour of a virtual but very close dialogue. I am not going to read Paul's CV, but I would like to point out that Paul is a senior fellow at Jackson School of Global Affairs at Yale University, a former deputy director of the International Energy Agency, and a career diplomat at the US State Department. I want to highlight in that sense that he was ambassador to Chile, among other high-level positions in US diplomacy. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today. Welcome to the dialogue, and it is a privilege for me to start this conversation. Previous to start, Paul, I want to inform that we will have an open 15-minute window to questions of the audience at the end of this conversation. Welcome, Paul, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Alfonso, for your kind invitation, and congratulations on your new position with the dialogue. It's really great to have you back in a prominent role on the hemispheric stage after all the great work you did in 6 years at OLADE in uplifting that organization. So thanks for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Paul. It's always a pleasure to be with you. probably the audience have to know that when I was the executive director of OLADE, you were in the International Energy Agency, and we really developed an incredible relation between the two agencies and cooperation between the two agencies. For example, we collaborated in the creation of the energy information system, with collaboration with OLADE and International Energy Agency and IDB. That was a great work and collaboration, and it's always a pleasure to have you and to have this kind of close conversations about the energy sectors. Well, let's start with the main questions and what we have to discuss today. And the first question to you for you to Paul is, what are the real implications of these elections for Latin America, and could there be any impact on energy or climate in the region depending on the electoral outcome?
Well, thanks a lot, Alfonso. And I'd like to lead off just with the general statement that Latin America is extremely well positioned over the next several decades on virtually all energy and climate topics. And I think it will do very well regardless of US political processes, and in fact, regardless of what the pace of the clean energy transition is. And the reason here, and of course, we've discussed this many times in visits to Ecuador and in Paris and in all the OLADE Energy Weeks, is that Latin America is very rich in fossil fuels, it's rich in renewables, and it's rich in critical minerals. It has good relationships with the US, but it also has good relationships with China, which are both of which are going to be very, very essential moving ahead. Now, of course, as you mentioned, Alfonso, these endowments differ country by country, and the political relationships are quite different country by country. So it's difficult to make overall generalizations. But I do think it's important to note that whether we're looking at an IEA scenario that shows a slower transition to net zero, or a quicker transition, a more Paris-oriented result, or a more business-as-usual result, Latin America can thrive under any of those assumptions. So that's the first point. And then the second point about kind of where these issues will stand after these US elections. My personal sense is that energy and climate issues will not be a particularly high priority for Latin America policy for either a Harris or a Trump administration. I think if you kind of take a look at what the issues in the hemisphere will be, that will be the number one issues. Clearly, US-Mexico relations will be at the very, very top. There's many, many issues associated with Mexico moving ahead. Some of them are economic related, investment related, and to some extent, energy related, if you consider electric vehicles as part of the energy space. But certainly US-Mexico, what's going to happen to the USMCA, the USMCA review, just overall investor confidence in Mexico, that's going to be very, very important. The second issue, the perennial issue of Cuba. Cuba is going to be a big issue for either administration. I think a particularly important issue for perhaps the Trump administration. Cuba is teetering right now. It's in the middle of a huge energy crisis. And I think that the issue of Cuba sanctions will be a big issue. Venezuela, I think, will also be a big issue, particularly for the Republicans. It doesn't appear that the efforts to open up and to ease sanctions have been particularly effective in changing Venezuelan behavior. So I think Venezuela will be definitely on the table. Then, of course, the elephant in the room is immigration. That's going to be a major issue. It has been a major issue in the campaign. And I think for either candidate, they will be measured on their ability to control the flow of migrants across the border. This has been a huge challenge for us for many decades. This time around, it needs legislation. It also needs better border controls. Things are very difficult to do in practice. But I think those issues will probably dominate the U.S. Latin America scene. But that being said, I prepared many papers over the years for secretaries of state, and during transitions, saying these are going to be the 4 issues that you're going to have to focus on in this hemisphere. And then the next day, there's a hurricane, or there's an earthquake in Chile, or there's some huge development in global markets, and we return to crisis management. So those are a few initial thoughts to get this discussion going.
Thank you very much, Paul. Let's size a particular information regarding the difference of the commercial influence of U.S. relations in the region. For example, with Mexico, the exports to North America represent more than 80% of the exports of the country, and in that sense, the influence that that commercial relation with the U.S. that has, for example, Brazil, is completely different, and that kind of situation is a particular point to highlight. Is completely different the vision of the U.S. elections in Mexico than the implications of U.S. elections in Brazil, for example, or other South America countries. And I completely agree with you that the geopolitics and what is happening regarding migration, for example, will be at the top of the discussions regarding U.S. and Latin American relations. But let's talk about the energy and climate change policies of the two candidates. What are the main difference between the energy policies proposed by Trump and Harris under your vision?
Right. Well, thank you. But I think it's also important upfront, and this, I think, particularly for the Latin American viewers on this podcast, to keep in mind that the U.S. system, the executive branch, does control quite a few levers. They're not unimportant, but in the U.S. system, the power is really distributed rather evenly. And if we take a look kind of at our crystal ball over the next 4 years, we have to consider where the executive branch is going, but also who controls Congress, which party controls which house of Congress, where our judicial system is going, because a lot of what will happen in energy and climate will be governed by how the courts determine how much capacity the executive branch has in terms of imposing regulations. And finally, global energy markets. Global energy markets can basically take over and send much more powerful signals than anything that the governments can do. So this is just a note of caution. But let's turn to your question, which is the executive branch. What would they be likely to do on energy and climate? Well, we've certainly heard from the Trump team that one of their first steps will be, again, to pull out of the Paris Agreement. So I was working at the IEA when the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Agreement the first time. and I had the opportunity to work very extensively on the international scene in multilateral settings, and to kind of gauge what the response was. And at that time, if you kind of took a look around the world at top meetings, at international climate gatherings, there was an enormous outpouring of support and activism on the part of other US actors that were not in the federal branch. For example, state and local governments, governors, mayors, corporations, civil society, philanthropies. So they stepped up to the plate. I wouldn't say they completely replaced the federal role, but they certainly sent an international signal that that the U.S., that many important actors in the United States system were still supportive of climate. And I would expect that if the Trump team comes in and does pull out of Paris, we'll see something similar this time. And we've also seen a big strengthening of the Paris process. You know, it's been in place for 9 years now, and countries are committing to ambitious net zero commitments. They're adopting policies, they're adopting strategies, and I don't see a Trump withdrawal from Paris as lessening the commitment on the rest of the world to strong climate action. The one area that I think could be affected, and I think you wrote about this also in your article, we tend to agree on most things, Alfonso, is the question of official finance. What's going to happen to official finance flows? And those could be hurt if the US pulls back. But on the other hand, if you take a look at the global financial flows that are needed for climate action, most of those fall either into domestic resource mobilization or private sector mobilization from international private sources. And a lot of that depends on things like global interest rates. It depends on things like investment climates in countries, and where the markets are and what's happening to cost levels, costs for renewable energy inputs, this sorts of things. So I still see a lot of climate dynamism, even if the Trump administration comes in. Now, the other issue that I think you might see differently with Trump is some pullback on the regulatory side, the domestic regulatory side in the US. Areas like automobile efficiency standards, power plant emissions standards, this type of things. So what you may see, and you'll probably see, is that the pace of clean energy transition in the US, it goes on, but it's more guided by market forces and less by regulation. But to some extent, that's been happening anyway. So during the first Trump administration, you saw, you know, a fairly substantial reduction in U.S. emissions because coal plants were closing, natural gas plants were opening, renewables were expanding. And you still have a lot of push from the state and local side in the U.S. More than half of the U.S. states have something called renewable portfolio standards, where they have in their electricity mixes, they have percentage goals for renewable energy. And many of the utilities in the U.S., electric utilities, have net zero commitments that are pushing them, again, towards nuclear energy, towards renewables. So a lot of this will continue. On fossil fuels, certainly one issue that we'll see right away from a Trump administration will be the renewal of approvals of liquefied, of LNG exports that were put on hold by the Biden team. So that's something that would be a change. On the other hand, I would expect that the Harris administration would also resume approvals of LNG facilities for export. These are going to be needed in the global markets. The Europeans want them. Asia wants this gas. But with the Harris administration, you might see those approvals linked to tighter environmental standards, and in particular on methane emissions. Methane is a really important topic And many countries around the world, including in Europe, are not going to buy the U.S. gas unless there's some pretty strict methane restrictions attached. So that could be one area where you see a bit of difference. On oil, I don't really see much difference between the two administrations. You might see the Trump team easing some drilling in federal land, something like this, but that's not a big chunk of oil. I think you would still see the IEA is expecting the U.S. to expand liquids production by a couple million barrels a day by 2030. I think that would be the case under either administration. So those are a few of the differences. Now, on the legislative front, this really depends on who controls Congress, which party controls Congress. And if you assume that the executive branch and the legislative branch are going to be in different hands, then really you can only work together if you can get some kind of bipartisan deals on legislation. That's been very difficult to do in our country in recent years. But I do see some areas where you could see progress, no matter who is in the Oval Office and who is in Congress. So there's some areas where we actually do have some convergence of views. Nuclear power, for example, right now is supported on a bipartisan basis. Some types of liberalization on permitting of infrastructure, both fossil fuel infrastructure and renewables infrastructure. That's a possibility. China-related issues, cracking down on China. It's a popular issue in the U.S. now. And then the whole issue of carbon pricing. Carbon taxes are not terribly popular. My former bosses, James Baker and George Shultz, the late George Shultz, they were pushing a more disciplined carbon pricing system in the U.S. That doesn't seem too likely politically, but there is a lot of discussion about some type of carbon import fee for imports that have higher levels of embedded carbon than in U.S. products. So that's something I think that could be interesting. So those are a couple of issues on the legislative side and on the executive branch side that could be different or not different from one candidate to the other.
Great, Paul. You gave a lot of information. I have some specific questions about topics that you highlighted in your response to this question. One of the questions that I have, and I will give you two different questions in at the same time. One of the questions that I have is in that sense, considering the positioning of the two candidates, what are the difference regarding the U.S. relations with Latin America? Not only in the energy and climate change, because the geopolitics of the Latin American right now will have some leaders in the region with more affinity with U.S. leaders, dependent who will win the elections. And my question is, if the U.S. relations between Latin America and United States will be related and based on ideological affinities, or will be more oriented under a foreign affairs approach, and that is a big issue. And I have a second question regarding one point that you highlighted in your intervention, because you said Trump the position regarding the climate change commitment and go and returning to his previous position in the first administration. Is possible under the legal framework and the structure of the Congress that you mentioned in your response. Is possible that he has the room to go back on climate commitment, or is only part of the rhetoric of his campaign?
Right. Thank you. So the first question is a tough question, of course, especially for someone who was a former career diplomat. And, sort of in the diplomatic circles, the way we used to frame these issues was, well, we would like to think of that the policy could, carry over from one administration to the other. And, the U.S. policy was, relatively consistent from one administration to the other, and, without big jumps. But unfortunately, we've diverged a little bit from those kind of rules of the game in the last few years. But I would say in general that I would expect a Trump presidency to be more transactional, less focused on kind of values-related issues like democracy and human rights, which have been always a bit more of the Democratic party's leanings. So, but I think you would see some kind of hard-nosed diplomacy on the part of Trump. I mentioned before on Cuba and on Venezuela. These are, I think, targets of opportunity. There have been goals for many years to see, and here we are looking. Both parties, I think, are looking for a democratic opening in those countries, and maybe take another push at that. So I think that would be an issue that would be different from one to the other. I think in terms of working multilaterally versus working kind of unilaterally or bilaterally, I think the Trump group would tend to work more unilaterally or possibly bilaterally, less multilaterally. That has not been very popular. I remember in the first Trump administration, a lot less focus on G7 meetings, G20 meetings, things like this. So I think that would be another issue. So those are a couple of the differences that I would see. On your second question about whether President Trump could change any of the existing policies, I think one of the big questions is, will the Inflation Reduction Act, can the Inflation Reduction Act be changed, or can it be, or can portions of it not be carried out by a Trump administration by withholding funding or somehow rescinding authorities, things like this. I think this is going to be one of the big issues out there because there's a lot of money, there's a lot of policy embedded in the IRA. There are extremely generous subsidies, in particular for hydrogen, which could affect the hemisphere, but also for battery production, for inputs, for other parts of green energy. And the Inflation Reduction Act, many of the subsidies that have been built in are not capped. So there's kind of no way to know exactly what the ultimate cost of these measures will be. They don't have a ceiling on the tax credit. So, the cost to the taxpayer could, eventually be quite high. So I think those are issues that are out there. Whether there would be a legal ability to stop some of this spending, and then what impact that would have on investors who are already making decisions on the expectation that this bill, will be in place for another 10 years and that these incentives are locked in. So I think those are quite important issues that could affect the pace of the clean energy transition in the U.S. Because a number of those investments, could have macro impacts on, let's say, how quickly the U.S. Shifts into electric vehicles or shifts into hydrogen.
Great. Well, you mentioned the position of Harris regarding the oil and gas in the U.S. Territory, but you believe that more restrictive position regarding about oil and gas will have a sharp opportunity for this kind of activity to go, for example, to Vaca Muerta or Brazil or other markets if the U.S. market has more restrictions?
Well, in general, I don't think that. I think that U.S. oil and gas will expand probably at the same rate under a Trump or a Harris administration. So I think if you take a look at some of the IEA numbers going out to 2030, the non-OPEC growth in oil will be dominated by the U.S., Brazil, Guyana, and possibly Argentina. I don't see this as changing too much under either candidate. I think the momentum for these investments, all the offshore investments in Brazil and Guyana, the money is there, it's committed, it's going to happen. And I think either administration, would be supportive of U.S. companies or other companies that are involved in those activities. I don't see, an effort to restrain those activities. So I think that would move ahead, and I think the activities on the U.S., the fracking, most of the U.S., the increases in U.S. production are going to be occurring most likely in Texas. There's not a lot there, and there's no, problems there, any kind of state level problems or federal level problems with expanding tight oil production in Texas or in any of those other states. And quite frankly, if you take a look at the comments that even the Harris team has made in the debates and the presidential debates, it's pretty clear that the Harris team is actually taking credit for the expansion of U.S. oil production under the Biden administration, which was, quite substantial. If you take a look at all liquid production, which includes natural gas liquids, the U.S. is up to something like 20 million barrels a day from 16 million 4 years ago. So that's a 4 million barrel increase in 4 years, which is huge. And similarly, natural gas production has increased quite substantially during the Biden administration, not as much as during the first Trump administration. But so I don't see the brakes being put on there, and I don't really see internationally there being any particular repercussions from one or the other candidate being elected.
And considering the same question, but considering the more aggressive renewable energies policies by Harris, what could be the impact in the mining sector, critical minerals in the Latin America? Do you see that that could be a spillover of that kind of local policies in the market that has more of the critical minerals around the world? For example, Chile with copper, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile with lithium. All the critical minerals markets, considering the Harris administration,
right,
more aggressive.
Well, I think one area where Latin America is very privileged also is in the number of Latin American countries that have free trade agreements with the US. It's very substantial. It's Mexico, all of Central America, Colombia, Peru, Chile. So it's all the mining countries. All the mining countries have free trade agreements. And that means that they also have privileged entry into the Inflation Reduction Act benefits, the tax benefits. So the inputs can be sourced from free trade agreement countries. So I think this gives it a lot of, this gives a push for Latin America to incorporate itself in a larger way into US supply chains. At the same time, the Chinese are also pushing all of these countries to get more integrated into their supply chain. So I think there'll be, something of a healthy competition there because many of these countries, rightfully so, are saying to both the US and to Canada, which is a big mining country, and to China saying, okay, we welcome greater engagement in critical minerals, but we want more value added and we want more processing to take place in our countries. And so I think this is an interesting debate, and I think this could be, a bit of a race to the top, where the Latin American countries are able to, take advantage of their endowments, but also insist, that the value added also, be concentrated and be, that jobs and value added get located more in these source countries. So, I see this as being, very favorable for Latin America. And I see it happening under either Harris or Trump. I mean, even if you take a look at the first Trump administration, there was quite a big focus there on mineral security. Now, admittedly, it was to focus on minerals that were needed for the U.S. Defense sector, things like that. But it was important. There was a focus on rare earths, other minerals, and working with partners and allies. So I think that I think under either U.S. administration, there'd be quite a bit of competition between the U.S. and China to work with Latin America on critical minerals. Basically, both countries want to keep a lot, of the value chains going in their directions, and Latin America, could be the beneficiary.
Completely agree and understood your analysis. But you were talking about the Inflation Reduction Act and what will be the position of Trump and all the position during the campaign about the Inflation Act. But you know that the implications of the IRA within some Republicans communities, Republican supported areas is important, and what will be the real support that the Republicans will provide to Trump in order to make changes in the IRA.
Right. Well, I think that's a question that we don't know the answer to yet. But I think a lot of it depends. The IRA is a massive piece of legislation. It's absolutely enormous. And there are hundreds of different small subsidies, grants, loan programs, tax credits. It's a very dense beast. And so I think it is quite possible that large chunks of the IRA will be off limits for any change. In particular, some of those investment incentives that have created, huge backlogs, for example, for battery facilities, location of battery facilities in the U.S. location of electric vehicle assembly plants, I think those won't be touched because, as you say, those go into Republican districts. There may be other parts of the IRA that that they may try to, as Trump pointed out, restrict some of the grant funding that has not yet been spent. Find some tool in which some of that could be frozen. But the big chunks of the IRA, where the big money will likely go, and as I mentioned before, the price tag is unknowable because these tax credits go on for 10 years. But the electric vehicle tax credits for the consumer, the production tax credits for the batteries, the solar and wind tax credits, which benefit many communities, and then the tax credits for inputs for solar and wind, which are very, very important, that are creating a lot of new manufacturing employment. I think these will, these won't be touched, but there could be other areas around the margins where there could be an effort to restrict some of that funding.
Well, we have 7 minutes for three final questions. One is, and both questions are connected. What is the implications about the elections regarding nearshoring and power shoring, and what is in that sense the commercial implications with Mexico? And we have to talk about Mexico because Mexico is an independent issue to talk about the relations with Latin America and the Caribbean. And the other question is the implications about the relations with China and the role of China depending of who wins the elections.
Right. So those are, of course, huge questions. I don't know that we can say too much about them in 7 minutes. But Mexico clearly, the largest trading partner for the U.S., and of course, the U.S. is the largest trading partner for Mexico, although China is expanding its footprint in Mexico. My sense is that the Trump administration will focus on the bilateral trade deficit with Mexico because they do tend to focus on these deficits, and it has been expanding, including since the establishment of the new USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that was agreed to under the Trump administration. And so I think a lot of the focus will be on this 2026 review, the 8-year review of how the MCA is going. And I think no matter who is in the executive branch, I think the executive branch as well as Congress will take a close look at Mexico and its treaty commitments. Now, the Trump administration was very proud of the fact that they were able to negotiate somewhat tougher standards into the USMCA versus NAFTA, the predecessor. The minimum contents for free trade eligibility are, I think, 50 to 60%. The standards for autos are even higher, 75%, with all kinds of other requirements for certain wage levels for certain products and inputs. So I think a lot of the USMCA requirements, will make it difficult for China to, sell through Mexico into the U.S. market. This seems to be the concern that everyone has. But I think there will still be, a close look at that review to see whether Mexico is, fulfilling all of its requirements in terms of a level playing field. And there's some developments going on now in Mexico, that created some concerns. I don't think they're fully played out yet. but there are some legal reforms that are underway now with the selection of judges, the possible elimination of some of the energy regulators, who have been very important in bringing clean energy investment into Mexico. On the other hand, there are also pledges by the new Mexican government to raise the percentage of renewables in the Mexican energy mix. So I think there are a lot of question marks out there. There's a new administration in Mexico, but I think a lot of the focus will be on the MCA, whether it's being carried out in a way that the U.S. And others find acceptable, and so this review will be very, very important.
And regarding the nearshoring and power shoring?
Well, I think nearshoring will be important for either administration. It's embedded in the IRA, as I mentioned before, so I think that will be a priority. Power shoring, I was going to flip that question over to you because I think you're the expert on this issue. I don't know too much about it, so maybe you can provide your views. Do you think that, Alfonso, I'll turn into the questioner now. Alfonso, do you think that there are opportunities for Latin America to take advantage of its very clean electricity matrix, which is amazing, and that it could attract investments, in certain high emissions industries that could, utilize that very clean grid to export products and to develop products. So, what is your view on this?
Well, I believe that the region has an outstanding position regarding the clean energy matrix and electricity production. When I was in OLADE, we developed an analysis that 11 countries in the region has higher than 80% of electricity production from renewables, and that is an impressive percentage of the electricity production. The big issue here is how to use the existing regulatory framework, the existing scheme of the electricity sector to install new production activities, provide energy security. For example, the problems that is facing Ecuador right now. They have a very high renewability in the system, but the energy security doesn't have the conditions to attract investment for power, for any kind of production, and that is a big issue. And the other issue is the difference between countries in the region, because it's very easy to make business in Chile, Uruguay, other countries that has investment rates for the to capture foreign investment, but it's not so easy when you are talking about countries that doesn't have the legal framework, the institutions to provide the business environment for that, and that is the great challenge that the region has. We have a good power generation. We have to improve our grids because there's a important problem regarding the grids and connectivity between the resources and the consumption, and there are a lot of challenges about it in the future. Well, Paul, we finished our established questionnaire for your intervention, but we are open to the audience to have to have one or two more questions. We have 10 minutes for this dialogue. Michael, I don't know if you. We have two questions. Michael, ¿puedes leer las preguntas? Can you read the questions of the audience?
Sure. So our first question is from Kelly Myman, and she asks, how do you see the outstanding USMCA dispute settlement proceedings on energy playing out in the context of the USMCA review?
Well, first of all, thank you, Kelly. Great to hear from you. And I have to say that I am not that familiar with the all of the dispute settlement complexities in the MCA. So I am going to defer that question. I think it's a key issue, but I think I would have to refer it to the lawyers at USTR to get their considered opinion on that one.
Michael, the other question.
Sure. And our second question is, what future do you see for biofuels, including SAF, in the US and in Latin America?
So I'll take that one. And I happen to be very rather bullish on biofuels, in particular advanced biofuels in Brazil. I had the opportunity to launch back in 2016 the Biofutures Initiative with the IEA and the government of Brazil, and I've worked with the Brazilians over the years, and I think there is a great potential for modern biofuels to cut costs and to be competitive. Now, full disclosure, David, you remember I was ambassador to Chile back during the Bush administration when we were pushing very hard for what they called second generation biofuels, and we were never able to get costs down. But I think the Brazilians using their inputs are doing good work on this. So I think biofuels have potential, and I think they have potential to feed into the SAF market. But I still think there are issues with regard to scale. And so I guess the question is how much SAF, how much will SAF, the sustainable aviation fuels, actually, contribute percentage-wise to decarbonization of the aviation sector? I think it will be something of a modest contribution without a very, very high carbon price or some other kinds of extreme incentives. But I think it's important for the Brazilians and others and in the US to continue to do R&D on this to try to drive cost curves down.
I want to add that regarding biofuels, probably is one of the areas that the region has more synergies, because US has an important and historical positioning about biofuels. Brazil is one of the leading countries around the world about biofuels, and the position of the Americas in negotiation with the rest of the world in most of the international platforms is very consistent, because if you talk with the Europeans about the biofuels, they are not so supportive to to
I
biofuels.
would,
And we have as a region to support and establish a good positioning for the role of the biofuels in the energy matrix of all the region, and that is I believe that there's a very interesting synergies between North America and South America about South America and Central America about biofuels. I don't know if you agree with this opinion, Paul, but that is my perception.
yeah, no, I agree. And I think, the issue is fraught internationally because there are many views, especially in Europe, but in other parts of the world about, a lot of concerns about the environmental sustainability of biofuels, and particularly if they ramp up, the impacts on agricultural production, things like this. So they definitely have to be done the right way. The Brazilians have have a comparative advantage in the sugar-based biofuels and again in the next generation biofuels, which I think can accommodate a lot of those environmental objections. But there is, the possibility of biofuels expansion in other parts of the world that doesn't have those same kinds of protections. So I think Brazil is kind of, uniquely positioned here to play leadership role.
Yeah. And a last question, very linked to this issue. That is, if you think that depending of the candidate, there's could be a movement about the relations and alliances of the region with more close with Europe or Asia in a particular areas, or that kind of geopolitical movement could be a possible scenario depending of the candidate.
I don't really see that happening. I think what's much more likely to happen is the focus will be for Latin America, kind of how to balance US and China. And China has a lot to offer Latin America. But China also represents something, it could represent a bit of a threat in certain areas as well. So China has so much overcapacity in so many different industries. They have the capability of overwhelming different countries with inputs. I'm thinking of steel in countries like Chile and Brazil. But on the other hand, China also can provide incredibly economical inputs, solar panels, areas where they have tremendous overcapacity now, batteries, solar, electric vehicles, that can accelerate the clean energy transition. So I think, but some of these things could also involve, jobs, either positively or negatively in Latin America. So I think, Latin America has a great opportunity here, but they've got to manage these relationships very carefully. And I think that the greater likelihood of there being kind of political tensions would be between the U.S., balancing their relationships between the U.S. And China, and seeing if they can, benefit from the IRA as well as from this burgeoning relationship with China. And it's a big issue for the world too. How can the world benefit from these incredibly low prices right now of these Chinese clean energy inputs to accelerate decarbonization, without essentially destroying, the industrial backbone of, the rest of the world. And so, I mean, this is just a huge issue, and I mean, it's an issue for every country in the world. If it's electric vehicles in Europe, or batteries in the U.S., or steel in Brazil. So I think these are going to be some really big questions that will kind of dominate the geopolitical discussion in the next few years.
Well, that was a wonderful conversation, Paul, and it's always a pleasure to have you. I always had you in the energy week of OLADE, representing the International Energy Agency and providing the worldwide vision of the energy sector and the relations with the Latin American and the Caribbean. And now you are a friend of the dialogue. We want to have you involved in our discussions. I know that this is a first discussion because the elections will be next week. We will have a more detailed scenario about the future after the elections, and we have to have a deep understanding about the policies of the candidate after the elections. And I know that we will have future opportunities to have an exchange of positions, new conversations, and include our incredible network in the dialogue. The idea is to generate this kind of conversation in person in DC the next time in an energy conference that we are organizing for the end of March or beginning of April, and all of you are invited to that activity that we are thinking to organize. And thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much to all your vision and your experience in this event and in this conversation. Thank you to the dialogue team that supported and coordinated all the technical aspects of this virtual event. And well, it was a real pleasure, and thank you to all the audience for joining us during this event. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alfonso. This is a great opportunity, and welcome to the dialogue.
Thank you, Paul. Bye, Michael.